The first panel member will be Dr. Ronda Hampton. Dr. Hampton, what is your definition of bizarre behavior? Why is this important?
Thank you. As it's related to mental health issues, and of course my profession as a psychologist, bizarre could be anything from a family member describing an individual's behavior as much different than it normally would be. So while that might fall within the range of what we might consider normal, for this family member, they might say that this is bizarre for this individual. And then, of course, it can range from those behaviors that would be most apparently bizarre to anybody. So someone who might be talking to themselves, or someone who may be making, statements that are don't appear to be factually true. Those types of things would be considered bizarre.
So why is it important to use the term bizarre as opposed to mentally deficient, mentally ill, mentally crazed, whatever?
Right. Bizarre encompasses a lot of things. So someone might be behaving in a way that's unusual, but it doesn't mean that they are suffering from a mental health issue. It could be that they could be using drugs, they could be drunk, it could be some type of metabolic or other physical disorder that's going on with them. Could it just be that they had a bad day? I mean, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily a mental illness.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What is Form 5150 of the Welfare and Institutions Code, and how does that relate?
As far as it's related to bizarre behavior, first of all, the 5150, I have to read really back to my education, but
that's okay.
Around about 1967, 1972, the Latimer-Pettis Short Act was established and brought into law. I believe that was 1972 approximately. And the point of that was to make sure that that people who had some type of bizarre behavior, possible mental health issue, that they would, number one, not be kept inside a facility longer than what they needed to be, so that their rights were protected in terms of not being detained any longer than they needed to be, but also for their own safety. So to make sure that people weren't out there about in the world without anybody to care for them, and so that they could be taken in and they could be evaluated. And out of that LPS Act came the 5150. So basically, it is a you're calling it here a form, but it's a way to get a person evaluated, and that could be by a qualified mental health professional in a hospital setting. So it might be that a person is brought to a hospital setting, they're evaluated by a psychiatrist or a mental health person at the hospital setting, or out in the field. Someone might, in my case, people might be in my office exhibiting bizarre behavior, and I may call, in my city it's the PET team, might call them to come out and evaluate the individual to determine if there is need for hospitalization or detention. Additionally, the law enforcement can place someone on the 5150 or recommend them for a 5150 status based on bizarre behavior. So when you're driving down the street and you see someone acting kind of bizarre, and you kind of get the sense that maybe they're not all there and something might be going on with them, then you can call law enforcement to come in and check that person out and see if something's wrong with them. And it may be that maybe they do need some help, and in that case they could be 5150 taken to the hospital. And at the hospital there'll be a determination made as to whether or not this person would be able to care for themselves, or if they're a danger to themselves or a danger to others. And then it would be determined if they would remain in the hospital, or if they would be released to family members, or if they could be released on their own.
What may be the consequences for the person in custody if the 5150 form is not used, if there might be some hints of bizarre behavior?
So like I said, in the case where someone is approached by law enforcement, or if they're brought to a hospital, or if they're, while in a private practice, if the PET team comes in, then they would make a determination: is this person gravely disabled? Are they a danger to themselves, or they are a danger to others? So that's the point of that form. At that point, the person they're informed that they're not arrested. They're informed that they're being detained for their own safety, to be checked out. And so they know that they're going to be brought to some type of mental health facility and that a mental health specialist is going to evaluate them. So it's a quick little form, just basically asking what are, what were the unusual behaviors that the person was exhibiting, and sort of a justification for recommending, and that's the important part, it's a recommendation. So that while law enforcement, or even while the PET team might come out and fill out the 5150 form, they may very well get to the hospital and the mental health evaluation team or the psychiatrist there, they make a determination that this person is not appropriate to be hospitalized. It could just mean that they need some medication, just a quick emergency medication, call a family, maybe family would take them home. It could mean, in some cases, when I worked in the hospital, a lot of times it was just that people were malnourished. And sometimes just giving them food was enough to get them up and going. In that case, we call family member and get them the help they need that.
So what you're saying is basically no one size fits all.
No.
It just depends, basically case by case.
It definitely is case by case. And typically speaking, that's one of the reasons why it's important that it's up to a 72-hour hold, because sometimes people might be brought into the facility and they might appear okay, and they're sitting in the triage unit. You observe them for a couple of hours, and then you talk to them for a little bit. Normally there's a social worker that will talk to them, or some type of therapist, as well as a psychiatrist. And the more you start talking to trained people, then out comes, more serious signs of mental illness. Also, too, important is that when someone's being, especially if they're being brought in by law enforcement, they can be, very nervous, and so they can hold it together, and they may have their wits about them for a while, but once they're relaxed and kind of in the hospital setting for a while, and realize they're not going anywhere, you start talking to them, then they may start exhibiting signs that there's more of a serious issue. So that's why that 72-hour, up to 72 hours, it does not have to be that long. It's really, really important. It's an observation period. So it's not punitive, it's just let's check you out and make sure that you're okay.
Okay. So the last question is, what may be the consequences for the person in custody if the 5150 form is not used, and if they happen to be exhibiting some behavior, maybe at the time they're not exhibiting that behavior? You talked about that a little bit.
Oh, so meaning that if they were exhibiting bizarre behaviors and for some reason that they weren't hospitalized?
Right.
Well, in a lot of cases, or I shouldn't say in a lot of cases, frequently they may be exhibiting bizarre behaviors that are actually illegal activities. So sometimes it could mean that they're going to be incarcerated. If the voice is telling you, I just was hearing a story of a young man who the voice was telling him to break into this facility, and the voices were telling him to do that, and the security guard repeatedly told him, you can't do this, you can't do this, but he was overwhelmed by the voices, and he just kept doing it. He eventually admitted, I'm not on my medication, I have bipolar disorder, that type of thing. However, he was still placed in the jail system, which prolonged him getting his medication, which led to even more severe symptoms. Eventually, he was released. A short time later, and his parents were able to help him, and he was placed in the hospital. Now, while he was exhibiting those symptoms in the jail, he could have been placed on a 5150 even. They could have got him some help even while he was in the jail system. Some of that's optional.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, because you're talking about a very complicated situation. So I want people to understand it's deep and it's wide, but I just wanted to have Dr. Hampton provide some basic information, or baseline, if you will. All right, thank you, Dr. Hampton.